What's going on, guys? This is Chandler Smith, and in today's video, I'm going to answer the great question that everyone is asking, and that is, how much cash flow is enough cash flow? So in this video, we're gonna show you how to look at a property that you want to purchase and determine if it's going to have enough cash flow to make it worth it. So with all of that being said, let's jump into it. All right, guys, the answer to this question is $10 million. Yeah, this is what's so funny about this question is everyone wants to know, Chandler, I'm gonna go and buy this duplex or this fourplex or this 30plex or this 100plex, 100 unit apartment complex, maybe that sounds better. How much cash flow should it have? And the answer is you're asking the wrong question. Now, a lot of times people will say, oh, it should have $200 per unit, or it should have $400 per unit, or it should have $100 per unit. And the reality is that there are so many other factors that come into play when determining how much your property should cash flow that that's not the right question. Now, it is a question that should be asked, but it should be asked with your scenario, with your specific return, with your specific property. And in this video, I'm gonna go through all of the things that you need to be asking and looking at that are then going to help you determine how much cash flow is going to be enough. The only thing that I ask you to do is remember to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the little bell. And with all of that, let's jump into it. All right, guys, so first off, I need to give you an example. And this example is that there was a criteria floating around of, hey, you should cash flow $200 per unit. Well, here is the problem with that. $200 a unit, if you do the math, that ends up being $2,400 per year, which is incredible if you spent $50,000 for a unit in a duplex that costs you, $100,000. However, if you purchased an $800,000 single family home and it's only cash flowing $200 per unit, which is just one unit, so that's $2,400 for an $800,000 property, that's an atrocious return. It's a terrible investment. No matter how you look at it, that's gonna be a bad investment. Now, that's just one factor. On top of that, we've gotta look at what interest rates currently are and how much of a down payment you've put on the property. You've got to look if you're using leverage or you're buying cash. You've got to look at all of these different factors. And so when you're asking how much should a property cash flow, it's a real trick question, because the reality is sometimes $500 per unit is an incredible return, and other times it's absolutely horrible. Same with 200, same with 1,000, same with whatever number you pick. And so in this video, I'm going to dive into how you should look at cash flow to determine what the right amount is, because cash flow does matter. It just matters based on a myriad of other things. This is why the number one thing that I look at when determining if I should purchase a property is the cash on cash return. However, even the cash on cash return, if manipulated, can be a bad thing to look at when determining if you should purchase a property. And in order to break down these numbers, I'm gonna use my rental calculator that I created and give away completely free, because I want you to use it so that you can see all of the benefits of analyzing a property properly and picking one up for yourself. So if you wanna use my free app, you just hop onto the App Store, you plug in CDS Rental Calculator, you can download it completely free, and that's what we're gonna use to run through these numbers. All right, we're gonna hop into the rental calculator and we're gonna plug in a $100,000 purchase price. We're gonna start with 5% down because we're going to assume this is a duplex and you're living in half. Now, you might say these numbers are too low, you might say they're too high. Depends on what market you're in, but these are very clean numbers so that I can help you understand this principle. So we're gonna plug in 5% down, we're gonna plug in 1.5% as closing costs, 30% years to pay off, our interest rate is 3.5%, rents are gonna be $1,000, vacancy 6%, maintenance 12%, management 8%, and then we're gonna do insurance at $400, and we're going to do taxes at $1,200. Now, I'm making up these numbers, but they're also based on a property that I bought a couple years back. So if we plug in 5% down and we run the numbers, you can see that we're getting a 35.87% return. Now, this is astronomical. That's huge. That's an incredible return on your investment. A 35% return on the money you have down. That's pretty cool. But if we go back, all right, and first, before we go back, you can see that's $2,300 in cash flow. So you're just shy of $200 in cash flow per month. Now we're gonna go back to plug in the numbers, and now we're gonna put in a 25% down. Now, any property I analyze, I'm going to use a 25% down, and I'm gonna explain why. Even if I'm not putting 25% down. When you run the numbers, this puts you at a 12.95% cash on cash return, which meets my criteria. It's also going to put you at cash flow of $3,382, which is a great return. And you'll notice that that's more cash flow than the other property because you put more down, which means you have a smaller mortgage every single month. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this property in either scenario, I would buy, because my criteria is above a 12% cash on cash return with a 25% down payment. All right, guys, now we're gonna show you a different example, and I'm gonna show you how the cash on cash return can actually put you in a bad place. In this next scenario, we are going to do our 5% down again, but this time we're going to drop the rents to only $850. Now with 5% down, if we press run the numbers, you can see that we're getting a 14.81% cash on cash return. Rock on, this is awesome. We beat our 12% cash on cash return. However, when you look, your cash flow is only $951 for the entire year. This has now devastated your cash flow to where you're not even $100 per month. And so if we jump back out and we plug in a 25% down payment and you click run the numbers, you're gonna see that your cash on cash return drops down to a 7.7%. Now, one thing that doesn't make sense to people is they'll say, well, Chandler, you put down a smaller down payment, but you got a higher return. Yes, that's the power of leverage. That's the power of, how low interest rates are. And that's why you could meet the criteria of a 12% cash on cash return with only 5% down, but then you're only getting a 7% cash on cash return had you put a full 25% down. Now, this is why all of my properties, if I'm putting 5% down or 25% down, I run the numbers as if I'm putting 25% down, because then I know I'm going to have enough cash flow to protect myself. And even this rule can get a little bit finicky, but this is what I have found to be the best standardized way for me to determine if it's a good deal, and here's why. With a 25% down, you can see this does not meet my criteria. With the 5% down, it would have, but with a 5% down, you might have a good cash on cash return, but you do not have strong enough cash flow to bail you out if you were in a scenario where things go south, where maybe a water heater goes out or something else. For me, that $951 in cash flow you'd get with 5% down is not strong enough cash flow to purchase a property that big and take on that form of risk, because you're not making enough where if things do go south, you're gonna be toast. Now, everyone has to determine what that is for them. And I've come to find that if I put 25% down on a property and I can get a 12% cash on cash return, for me and for what I need return-wise to feel comfortable so that if things do drop, if rents drop, if I have a major expense, whatever it is, I feel like my cash flow is strong enough at that point to make it worth purchasing the property. Now, if you're putting 3.5% down or 5.5% down, the reason I like running the numbers as if you have 25% down is I know that is a good deal. I know that is a good buy, and I know that that will leave me enough cash flow to protect myself. Now, if I'm putting a lower down, I'm probably going to get more reserves, but I feel like this is a pretty safe way to analyze a property where I know not only is my cash flow going to be strong enough because it will be big enough to cover my bases, but also I'm getting the desired return that I want. I also like this rule because there are lots of people that will go and they'll say, oh, I only need $200 a month in cash flow. Well, that doesn't work, and we talked about those problems earlier. Or they might say, oh, I just need a 12% cash on cash return. Well, if you lower your down payment enough, you can get that even though it's still not a good buy. So when you have the right things in place where you're running the numbers as if you've got a 25% down and you're still getting a 12% cash on cash return, that's where I feel comfortable buying. Now, the only holdup or caveat to this is on the 5% scenario. Let's say we plug in a 5% down payment. Let's say we bump the rents back into $1,000, and then let's go and run the numbers. You can see that your cash flow, like we talked about, is $2,300. What you have to determine is, hey, do I know my market well enough that I've got my expenses, my vacancy, all of these things in the right place so that I'm never going to lose money every month? Even if rents drop, do I feel comfortable that this cash flow is strong enough that it's going to cover my bases so I'm at least not having to put money into the property because I've dug myself a hole? And am I in a place where I can set aside 6 months reserves or a year reserves? I personally would do a year if I'm doing a smaller down payment because you are going to have less cash flow. You've put yourself in a more vulnerable place. And so if I'm putting 5% down, I would say, yeah, $2,300 is enough because it meets my criteria, but I still want good reserves in case the worst case scenario happens. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are saying, Chandler, I feel like you haven't completely answered the question. Well, I have. I've come to determine that for me, if I can get a 12% cash on cash return and run the numbers as if I've got 25% down, that even if I buy the property with 0% down, 3% down, 5% down, that to me is a good deal. Right? I've got good refined criteria so I know what I'm looking for. However, if you're one of those people and this is going to be your first deal and you're looking at it and saying, hey, I'm going to go and live in one unit and rent out the other unit, I'm only going to put 5% down or 3.5% down, and you're worried about your risk, don't bail on buying a property. Just set criteria stiff enough so that you're comfortable with the risk that you're taking on. So if you're looking at that and you're saying, you know, $2,300, I still feel like those margins are pretty tight. They could get eaten up pretty quickly if I make a mistake. Maybe you say, you know what, my criteria is a 20% cash on cash return with a 25% down, because then if I only put 3.5 or 5% down, my return will be astronomical, my cash flow will be astronomical, and I'm very comfortable with it. And this is where a lot of times people will add the additional rule of, hey, per unit in my area, I want to have at least $200 in cash flow. So this is how I analyze deals, because I feel like it puts me in a very comfortable place to where if the worst case scenario does happen, I've got reserves and I know I've got enough cash flow to make it make sense. However, there might be people out there that say, you know what, Chandler, I'm pretty comfortable with running my numbers. I honestly am okay getting a 12% cash on cash return with putting my 5% down because I do have a lot of reserves and I just want to get into an investment property, and I feel like I'm ready to full send it on this one, knowing that might get eaten up and I might lose some money every month, but I also know right now I'm content with it. That's what you have to figure out. Everyone wants this bulletproof, this is the absolute perfect criteria. There are some people that hold to a 20% cash on cash return. There's some people that hold to a 6% cash on cash return, regardless of how much they put down. I personally feel like this is a place that I'm comfortable with because my cash flow is enough where I know it can get eaten up, and if it does, I'm still gonna be in the positive worst case scenario. I think it's a great criteria for you to follow as a new investor, but if you wanna be more aggressive, that's okay. And if you want to be less aggressive because you've got a lot of other money put away in reserves to bail you out, or because you're willing to put a larger down payment so that you know at the end of the day your payment every month isn't that much because you've got a lot of equity in the property because you've paid for that equity, you can do that. All of these things could be right answers depending on your scenario, and I hope showing you what my scenario is and what my criteria is helps you determine your scenario and your criteria so that you can buy properly. The only thing I will say is don't say, oh, I only need $200 per unit, because if you buy a massive unit, that could be a terrible investment that could put you in the negative if things go south. I also don't think it's a good idea to make it just purely based on your cash on cash return and then manipulate your down payment, because you could buy what I would consider a very bad property, a very bad investment that still will show you, hey, it's a 12% cash on cash return, because you can get an infinite return if you buy a deal where you have zero down and you borrow the entire amount, and then it's like, oh, my return is infinite. Well, your losses can be infinite as well if things go south, and that's why I wanna make sure I've got big enough cash flow to protect me if they do. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you remember to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the little bell, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future videos. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.